hat says, not finals, not Eastern Conference, not nice try, or see you next year. Champions. Let's go. Talk.
That's who did I steal from? Price tags on making the world feel some. They don't have enough to satisfy a real one.
Logical Raptors fanatic.
Shoot trying to miss. Like every shot.
Logical Raptors fanatic.
Try to make it so. I was gonna act surprised.
Logical Raptors fanatic.
Love the game of basketball. I mean, it's just more questions you have to ask me in order for me to tell you about.
Logical Raptors fanatic.
I just can't give you a whole spiel. I don't even know where you're sitting at. Like.
Salute, real ones. Project Truth always. Mike G back here with Logical Raptors fanatic. Happy Canada Day, and obviously big news. We got Pirtle back. Van Vliet got a max contract from the Rockets, something Kyle Lowry never even got, which is ridiculously incredible. Congratulations to Van Vliet. Obviously that puts us in a place. We picked up Dennis Schroeder, so we'll see how things formulate over the summer. But we're going to continue on with the CBA changes because some of the things will help or hinder our kind of resetting of things right now. Obviously, Fred VanVleet leaving was a big piece, but we're going to continue to move forward. That's how the Raptors do, and I trust in Masai that if Fred leaving was a possibility, that he has an idea of like an outcome or a plan to go forward from that, right? Like, he's a guy that tends to plan for each outcome, and he obviously had a plan B, C, D. Maybe Dennis was plan B, and now we're looking at another guy maybe for a bench PG, and we're gonna try to work things in. We'll see what happens, but today we're going to continue on with our CBA changes because they will obviously affect us going forward. So another big change proposed in the negotiations for the new CBA was the need for the NBA to have star players kind of play most of the games, because ad money comes from the fact that there's ratings. And if stars just keep missing games, ratings are down, and then all of everyone's money's down. So there needs to be kind of like a mechanism in effect that kind of rewards the people that play most of the games. And we're going to hear the interesting intricacies with this now. So two key changes will impact voting on postseason awards beginning in 2023-2024. Players will need to appear in a minimum of 65 games to be eligible to earn postseason awards such as MVP, Rookie of the Year, All-NBA, etc. So this is where it's kind of really interesting. Players would reportedly have to log at least 20 minutes in at least 63 of those games for them to count towards the 65 game minimum. They would be permitted to play between 15 and 20 minutes in 2 games and still have them count towards the minimum of 65 games. So you have to play at least 20 minutes 63 times in order to at least somewhat come into the neighborhood of the 65 qualifier, and then you have to have 2 additional games of between 15 and 20 minutes, and then that can equal 65 games. So there is a clear cut, like you can't just go in for 1 minute and that's a game, right? Let's hear what else it has to say here. A player who suffers a season-ending injury can qualify for the postseason awards with 62 games played. There will also be exceptions related to bad faith circumstances, which probably means like if anything comes up, that they'll kind of vote on it, I guess. I have no clue what that means just yet. Obviously, the CBA came out. I have a copy. It's 100 or 676 pages, which will take time to go through. It's not just the new stuff. It's all the old stuff too. It's what the whole thing is now again, and I have to kind of go through the newer parts and find them, and I have to keylog the different pages and stuff. I got to figure out how to go through a PDA properly and stuff, and I'll get that stuff for you on the deeper, more interesting parts. But for the more basic parts, I think it's easier to just read off here if there isn't going to be really any change or there's no real context to it, right? So let's continue on. The 3 All-NBA teams will be positionless rather than featuring 2 guards, 2 forwards, and 1 center. See, that's fairly standard. Like there probably needs no context added, so I won't be like talking about everything in that CBA language, but the key points, and when things come up with the Raptors during the season and over the next couple of years, I'll be using the CBA then, right? So let's continue on and try to get a grasp on the rest of this. So the 2 all defensive teams will be positionless rather than featuring 2 guards, 2 forwards, and 1 center. So positionless, 20 minutes at least for 63 games, and then the 2 games can be 15 to 20 minutes, and that's 65. And 65 is needed to get any of the postseason awards or be on the teams. So we got that covered. Let's move on. So now on to a subject that we have previous knowledge of on this channel. I went over the 2As and Exhibit 10 rules before. Some of them have changed. Some of them are still the same. So let's go through them. So teams will be permitted to carry 3 players on 2-way contracts instead of 2. That means the in-season roster limit will increase to 18 players instead of 17. And the off-season roster limit will be 21 players now instead of 20. So you're still cutting 3 players kind of at the end of camp in a sense that aren't on 2-ways and on the team and stuff, right? So they're increasing the camp roster to coincide with the increasing of the 2-way slots and the actual roster limit in season. So that's a good thing. Obviously we could have more guys developing, a couple more spots. We usually get the best guys out of the 2-way contracts, and now that we have the best calling card ever, we picked up a undrafted guy and worked him into a max contract guy. Now every undrafted kid coming out is going to be looking at the Raptors to see if they can get in to do the same thing that Van Vliet did. It's like the calling card for the next 5-10 years, easy, that we can attract really attractive players in this kind of zone of undrafted, and these 2-way contracts will come in big handy when we're kind of sussing out who we want to kind of elevate and who we want to kind of let go. So let's continue on. Players on 2-way contracts will have the ability to negotiate with teams to guarantee half of their salaries on the first day of the regular season. So I guess for like guys that are more established, they can maybe say, oh hey, this is my like 3rd or 4th 2-way. I want to make sure I'm getting some here, and it gives them a little more power to get money there, right? So that's fine, right? So the signing deadline of 2-way contracts will be pushed back to March 3rd. Okay, wow. That's a big change. That's a huge change. Because now it's after trade deadline that this kind of the 2-way deadline ends. So now Exhibit 10s will start up early, and I guess you can sign Exhibit 10s or 2-ways for up until March 3rd, and then Exhibit 10 can be signed whenever, right? So really interesting. So they're adding time to get two ways. So we would have been able to get Joe Easy on a two-way if we converted down pretty much in that whole, remember that scenario? Yeah. And we would have been able to do it later and still had a lot of options. So that's really good. So two ways are more like malleable. They're still valid. They don't just end. And then who you have on a two-way after January 15th, I think the date was. That, like, you know what I mean? So the maximum bonus for a player who signs an Exhibit 10 will be 75K instead of the 50K. That amount will increase at the same rate as the salary cap. So Exhibit 10s could receive a bonus if they do good, I guess. I don't know. Well, I have to look more into the payment of Exhibit 10s, but it's such a small fraction, and it's a small charge. But we have to keep that in mind when we sign Exhibit 10s, that they might cost up to 50K or 75K, and when the salary goes up, it'll cost a little bit more. So I think that's really interesting. A couple really interesting changes to the two-way and Exhibit 10 contract. So let's continue on with some more cap stuff. So here we got the new trade rules, and that's another avenue of resetting. So we saw getting undrafted players, whatnot. We saw what it takes for them to become all-stars and all-NBA and whatnot. But trading, let's see what's going on with that now. And there's a couple new things here that are really interesting, so let's go over them. During the 2023-2024 league year, teams above either tax apron will only be permitted to take back to 110% of their outgoing salary in a trade rather than 125. And starting in the 2024 offseason, teams above either tax apron will only be permitted to take back to 100% of their outgoing salary in a trade. So it sounds like a phasing. So this first year, teams in both tax aprons can still make trades for a little bit more salary, but it's only 110% and not the 125 that was permitted before, right? Because you only needed 75 in comparison. So this is how they do it. They counterjux it with the total percentage and whatnot. So 110 just means it needs to be 90% of the salary now versus 75% of the salary before. And then in next season, so not the season coming up, but next season, it's going to go strictly to 100. Both tax aprons have this trade hammer clause now. So we'll see how things work out. I think this will help with the ballooning and like asset hoarding and trying to get like a million superstars on one team. It'll kind of be harder to really have the pieces to do it, because you need to put together a package that is worth a max contract out of 2-3 guys if you're lucky, right? So we'll see how that works out, but we'll continue on. There will be a limit on how many minimum salary players can be aggregated for salary matching purposes during off-season trades. So interesting, during the season you can't aggregate people's salary for trade, but you can in the off-season with minimum salary players, and there's only a certain amount that you can do this. So interesting, they're limiting, but they're still allowing, because this process will happen naturally where a guy you'll offer him a qualifying offer maybe, and it's like a minimum value, right? And then you might sign him to that, but then later kind of think about it and maybe up his contract and then use him in a trade, and that's still fine. because you're still kind of in the same period of the off season. But during the season, once you lock guys in, you can't really trade things out. So we'll see if anyone can kind of loophole this any much, but we'll see how this works out. Traded player exceptions will allow teams to take back salary worth the amount of the exception plus 250k instead of 100k. So just salary, you can add a little bit more onto the traded player exceptions, and this is to try to like balance out so you can actually have enough to sign a guy, I guess. And that's what this plus is, to make sure that even if the traded player exception is really small, they're adding kind of a base figure to at least allow for you to kind of even get a rest of season guy or something like that, right? You know what I mean? Like something like that kind of value. So the salary matching rules for teams below both tax aprons will become more lenient, allowing those clubs to take back the following amounts in trade. Wow. Okay, let's go over this. 200% of the outgoing salary plus 250k for any amount up to 7.5 million. Okay, that's interesting. So it's meaning that players not in the apron can switch around role players more easily and not have to really match salary for guys under, well, up to 7.5 million. So this is where the interesting curveball is, because the second bracket point, or the median point, is judged by a different thing. It's not done by percent now. So the outgoing salary plus 7.5 million for any amount in between 7.5 and $1 million and 29 million. So basically what it's saying is all you have to do is add like 7.5 million to the outgoing salary, and you can accept up to 29 million pretty much. So like that's insane. That's definitely gonna help teams under the cap and make it, wow, there's gonna be some great moves and advantages to even shed salary or gain salary if you're under the first apron and the second apron. So this is really helping guys to build their teams when they're not locked in. This is what I'm talking about. They want player movement, but they want player movement with teams that are in that type of phase. They want teams to kind of build up at certain point and then try to go for it and lock in their guys. So that's kind of where it's trying to push things in that kind of direction, where it was kind of what Lex usually says, like old school type of way, where they keep their cores for longer. I think the NBA sees health in the league in this method. So let's continue with this next piece and then summarize the effects of each thing on the Raptors. A player and team cannot renegotiate the player's contract for 6 months after he has been traded. Conversely, a player who has had his contract renegotiated cannot be traded for 6 months. So interesting. So there's kind of like a freeze of a team, like they can't trade a guy after 6 months and after they renegotiated his contract. So you can't up guys and then trade them immediately. Interesting. So the apron, if we go into the apron, now that Van Vliet's kind of signed with Houston, we actually don't have to get rid of anyone. So they're gonna look to get an extension on Gary Trent. They're gonna look to get an extension on OG. Siakam's probably gonna get an extension. You know what I mean? So we won't actually hit the salary. I have to take a look at the numbers again and stuff, but I believe that we don't have to go into the aprons too far. So I think we're gonna be able to make a couple moves now, and it's gonna be interesting to see if we do make a move where we try to take on salary and push up into there with a guy that makes almost 30 million. As like a piece, we trade one of our prospects. Like all you need is like what, 14 million kind of, or whatever, you know what I mean? So like it's you just have to basically like add just a bit to it. So that's gonna be interesting. And then players above, yeah, like that's gonna be normal as business as usual, but bench players are going to start moving around a little bit more, and people are going to be able to fine tune around the stars better. And I think that gives the teams the ability to build better teams around players. So that'll be interesting. I think that's good for us, especially with the way we run things. So the options for different trades are now opened up immensely, because the salary is always a key point with us and how we do trades, and salary matching and taking on these waste contracts of guys that we'll never use and stuff. We don't usually do that. So now we won't have to take on those guys, and we could just take a pick and the prospect we want for like a guy of more salary, or if we're doing it in the reverse fashion where we're trading a prospect and a pick for a guy, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how Masai works these new trade rules. And yeah, just like I think we'll continue on with the different stuff next week in part 3. I think I'm going to focus more on some of the new contract signing stuff, and I'm going to have housekeeping. Always want to start off by saluting the real ones, thanking them for the likes, the comments, the subs. Last week's CBA special was really great. I just want to thank everyone for the support, especially Raptors Freak Lex, 9:30 a.m. Eastern every day, talking Raptors, having a community there. Obviously, there's a lot of news and stuff going on currently, but even when it's like not, when the news ain't happening, we're still there congregating, discussing about Raptors stuff, learning history and stuff, so it's a good time. Also, Grubstown Clink has been releasing some great videos of late, talking through some of the different things in free agency and some of the decisions with some of our vet guys and stuff. Really good, great stuff. Talking some contract stuff. If you enjoy when I talk about that kind of stuff, he also does it. Another great channel is Van Hoot's Basketball Rewind, where he has a discussion with a bunch of great intellectual basketball fans discussing different trends and topics regarding the Raptors. They did a lot of draft stuff and stuff Van Hoot's gonna do, but it is always great stuff there. And I just want to say, like, even if that Fred has signed with the Rockets, we're gonna continue and still move on. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there is no crying about anything. We just have to continue to push forward. And I think one thing happens, but it opens, one door closes and it opens new doors. So we'll see what advantages Masai can take from this situation. If he elects to take on salary to try to push for Siakam's window, or we kind of stand pat and try to build it out even long term and maybe look to deal Pascal. I don't know the future necessarily, but we'll see as the summer unfolds, and obviously this year we're going to definitely try and win and go for something. Salute the real ones. Project Truth always. Logical Raptors. Fanatic out. Mike G. Mike G.
Oh man, I love my team. Man, I love my team. I would die for them.
Not just cause I want to, cause I got to. Put the squad on your back, did the impossible. It's only logical, it's fitted from the heart.
Problems hit the gym, they all work out. MVP, MVP. Even next season looking like a breeze.